Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh of Inner Skilled. Today I have Ali Christos with me. Ali, what's happening today?
How you doing, brother? Good to be here with you and the audience.
Likewise. Hey, before I give you my standard question, I just kind of wanted to set the stage like I did before. I want to give Ali time at the beginning and the end of this conversation to really give the more standard, straightforward presentation of the helpfulness and usefulness of the kind of work he does. But in the middle, I'd like to explore deeper and give Ali an opportunity, perhaps, and the audience to maybe go a little bit deeper and more detailed into this container Ali works with here, if we can call it that, than normal. But I also don't want that to detract from the main helpfulness of the modality itself. It's just to investigate, to go deeper into and letting truth be the guide. When with buffered with kindness, helpfulness, not causing division, and if it's timely, I may fall short of that. But that's where I'm aiming. So with all that kind of out of the way there, who's Ali Christos and what kind of work does he do?
Well, Ali Christos is a person that is still in the process of becoming, like all of us that are alive today. What I do right now is I help people through a method called Quantum Hypnosis. And the goal is to quiet the analytical conscious mind enough that people can explore subconscious material more directly. So much like a meditation, except it's guided and it's following a very proven technique in which we were able to answer questions that people carry for a long time, patterns that may be repeating in their lives, questions they have regarding their life purpose, repeating patterns, relationships, whatever it may be. We look to answer it through their own inner wisdom. So many participants also report experiences that they interpret as connecting with a deeper source of wisdom or guidance, what some people may call the higher self or the superconscious. Whether that guidance is understood spiritually, psychologically, or symbolically is a personal interpretation. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
So yes, and I think it's so fascinating, I think, when we're accessing these deeper layers or layers of the mind and experience that we don't normally go around accessing in this day and age. I would say for most of us, most of the time when we're like going to the grocery store or, doing the to-do list or what all these base program things that we have to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel the majority of us, at least in the Western world, have been dumbed down compared to some of the things we've had and some of the if you just look from the 1800s and this kind of just the different layers, and then even further back in history, what we have from the Eastern religions and how deep and profound their access to reality is, I would just say. So can we talk a little bit about the background? This is based on the work of Dolores Cannon, right? And I've watched some of her videos years ago and was, when I was first getting into this, it blew me away, how this, I don't know, it's just fair to say, like some little old lady that's completely straight,
Yes.
like it doesn't have kind of any interest in this woo-woo stuff at all. It is just through basic a type and a technique that involves hypnosis is drawing out of her clients these like amazing experiences and remembrances and information that you would think if it was one off, you'd be like, okay, how's she doing this? This is some kind of magic trick or something, right? Like, but it's time and time again with client after client after client and all these different commonalities that are appearing. And I'm just left with, okay, well, I want to dig under the hood here a little bit. What's going on? How did, because I don't have much familiarity, I could have looked into this myself and done the research before, but how is she doing all this? How did she get interested in this? And most importantly, why is it doing this? How is this working the way it's working? You know what I mean?
Well, let me give the spoiler up front. We don't know exactly how it all works, if I'm being honest, but we know that it works. After decades of developing this technique and then thousands and thousands of her own clients and also her students, of which I'm honored to be one of them, we've come to find out that this technique works. How it works is a mystery, to be honest. Dolores, how she started was, she was actually not a hypnotist when she started. It was her husband who was the hypnotist. And they were in the Navy. And he was a very traditional hypnotist in the sense that people would come with PTSD, phobias, addictions, and they would help with that. And that's how most of the therapeutic hypnosis world is known for. Now, he ended up getting into a tragic accident and became wheelchair bound, at which point Dolores took over. And when she started to do the hypnosis sessions, she found that people would go into past lives. Funny enough, she didn't believe in past lives at the time, but then it occurred over and over again. And then she also found in deep hypnosis, people were accessing a deeper part of themselves that she dubbed the subconscious. Now, this is not to be confused with the subconscious as we know in psychology. This subconscious that she's referring to is the part of us that's connected to all that is and has knowledge of us prior to this lifetime and has our best and highest interest at heart. And so over time, through trial and error, she developed this technique that's now called QHHT, which stands for Quantum Hypnosis Healing Technique. And she called it quantum because we found that people were able to get healed and get healed not because of some magic or woo-woo, but because they were able to get to the root of what's causing their illness or their discomfort or their symptoms. And when they were able to discover where it came from, whether from this lifetime or another lifetime, and understand the truth behind it, then they had a choice whether to release it or hold on to it. And I say a choice because although many, many people find healing through this, some people don't. And that's very important to share because the question, begs that, okay, then why wouldn't they find healing? The reason is because at some level, they don't want to be healed. You may wonder why. The reason is because they have a payoff. So for example, I had a lady come see me and she had a very rare illness. And when the subconscious came through and we asked for a healing and because of her request, all clients come in with their questions. And many people come with health related questions, but not everyone. But this particular woman really wanted or said she wanted to be healed. But then when the subconscious came through, said that, yes, we can heal her, but she doesn't want it. And we asked for clarity. And they said that if she was healed, she's afraid that her partner would abandon her. So you can see that as human beings, sometimes we hold on to certain things, even if they don't seem beneficial to us, because we have some sort of payoff. So I would say in a nutshell, what Dolores has developed is an incredible phenomenon that has just swept the world with awe and admiration because its ability to access the wisdom that's within all of us, and in a way that's safe, in a way that's proven, in a way that even modern medicine is not able to do, and in a very holistic way, because we look at the person not just in this lifetime, but in all lifetimes from that perspective. And we look at it from a place of oneness, because that's the actual reality that we have come to believe in and remember, if you will. So when we access that with the best and highest good in mind for that person, then we find that oftentimes we have incredible sessions.
Yes, and like I say, this is it's fascinating, and I don't want to detract from the healing potentials, the healing reality, obviously. And I would implore people to go and do deeper research if they're not already familiar with this work and the testimonials and real life experiences about that, because there's just so many, And I do want to get into keep going into this territory here. And I mean, I'll have to do my own research on the Navy because the Navy itself, I come from a military background. I got out of it myself, right?
Oh, wow.
So my dad and uncle were Navy, and my both of my grandpas were in World War II. One was 82nd
Wow.
Airborne, which they're known for kind of like psychological stuff, another area. And then yeah. Anyway, so I won't go into that whole thing. I got out of it, but the Navy is before some of these intelligence agencies. The Navy was really involved in a lot of that, Office of Naval Intelligence. So I don't know how familiar you are with a lot of these different military programs, and also the special access projects and unacknowledged special access projects. So my a little flag went off right away there with the Navy guy. And I don't know, I'm not saying anything or not. It's just there's so much money involved and so much secrecy involved with things like this. And we see things with Project Stargate that's been declassified, things like MK Ultra. Part of that was in the 70s. And a lot of people say that it's just gone on from now. And, part of the MK Ultra stuff that we know about was heavily involved in hypnosis and stuff too. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad, obviously, because there's the polarity. So no matter how deeply kind of depraved the potentiality, the other polarity exists of the, transcendent, the pure, the helpful, the deeply profound and liberating. So, we have that whole huge spectrum to work with. So I want to go with this is, did Dolores ever talk about, was she working with different beings behind the scenes, that were giving her guidance? And so again, this does unfortunately involve some woo-woo that might turn traditional clients off. I think those drawn to this podcast, though, are looking to, and like you said, we don't know for sure. So we're just going on what we can. We can preface it that way. This is my best guess, or this is my intuition. And we don't want this to detract from the actual purpose and benefit of this. But I really want to expand the time scale here and the container, and especially look at the long-term potential of this, because yes, in this very life, it's when we access the past, it can have then benefits here, but then going forward, lifetime after lifetime, the really long term is wanted to get the benefit, especially in the long term, is what I'm reaching at. So if we can reach a little further, perhaps, So what is helpful to say about Dolores? How she may have been guided, where she got inspiration from, how she developed the technique, if she was met with choices of what to do, what not to do, and why, and the intentionality behind it. Sorry, it's a lot.
No, it's great. It's a good question. It's an important question. And I think that most people and I always like to come back to this, is that we all have our inner guidance that's always pointing us in the right direction. Whether we're attuned to it or not is another thing. But when you hear Dolores and when you hear her speak, and as you said, this rural grandma from Arkansas, you can sense that she has this, thing about her where it's almost like she doesn't give a shit what people think. She speaks her truth. And that type of candor, that type of courage is not something that many people seem to demonstrate in the way that she can. It just comes across as something that lands very solidly within our hearts, because it's truth, it's clarity, it's knowledge that perhaps at some level we all know about but don't remember. So to answer your question, yes, according to Dolores, and in her own books, lectures, and her teachings, she believed that clients sometimes encountered or communicated with a wide variety of non-physical intelligence during sessions. And I myself see that almost every day when I do sessions, that different beings come up. And these accounts were presented as client experiences and Dolores's interpretations, but they're not necessarily established facts. But that doesn't leave out the benefit that it gives to the clients, because whoever comes through is meant to help support the client's journey where they're at. So some of the beings and realms she wrote about include the higher self, or what she calls the subconscious. And this became the central focus of QHHT Dolores believed this aspect of the conscious, possessed wisdom that was beyond the everyday personality and could answer questions about health, life purpose, and spiritual growth. Then the other beings that sometimes show up are spirit guides, and many times they can show up, but we may not be aware of it. But the clients occasionally described these guides who appeared to offer support, teaching, or even protection. Then yet another type of beings would be angelic beings. Some sessions included encounters with beings interpreted as angels or highly evolved spiritual helpers. And I've had it in my sessions several times, and I'm happy to go into details if you're curious. Then deceased loved ones also show up. Some clients report contact with family members or friends who have passed away. So this is not abnormal in a quantum hypnosis session. And then the one that may interest your listeners and you might be, for example, extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings. And in books such as The Custodians, Keepers of the Garden, the Convoluted Universe series, and the Three Waves of Volunteers and the New Earth. These are all books by Dolores where she described client reports involving extraterrestrial civilizations, hybrid programs, and non-human intelligence. And a lot of the work that she did was helping people who were abducted help them to relive the memories that were wiped out of their experiences and help them integrate back into society after such an experience, and also find out if it was something that was benevolent or not. So she always looked out for the highest and best for her clients. And I think that that's very important when it comes to this type of work. Then the other types of beings that sometimes show up are ascended masters or enlightened teachers, such as Buddha and others. Some clients report encounters with figures they've interpreted as highly advanced spiritual beings. So I would put those in that category. Then we also have clients that go between life states. So they're between a past life and a life that's coming after that. And many sessions described a realm that's between, these incarnations where learning takes place, healing takes place, and planning for the next stage of evolution for their soul takes place. And so, other dimensions and realities that would come up, Dolores increasingly concluded that the consciousness was not limited. It was not something that was linear time or one physical reality, but based on reoccurring themes on her client reports showed that whatever we believe to be true oftentimes got questioned because new realities would come up. And even in my sessions to date, every session is unique and every session brings something new to the table for myself. So I don't claim, and I don't think Dolores claims to know it all and to have all the access. She's more like a researcher and a historian who likes to dig deeper and is very curious about consciousness in general. So Dolores herself acknowledged that these experiences through hypnosis, came through hypnosis and were reported by clients. So she interpreted many reoccurring themes across thousands of sessions as meaningful evidence of a larger spiritual reality. But these claims have not necessarily been scientifically established, and I don't think they necessarily need to be, because many times science falls behind what is actually going on beyond our senses. People interpret these experiences in different ways. Some see it as something that's literally happening or as genuine encounters with non-physical beings in other realms. Some see it symbolically, as expressions of the subconscious mind. Some see it psychologically as meaningful imagery that reflects inner process or a combination of these perspectives. But interestingly, despite writing extensively about extraterrestrials and spiritual beings, Dolores consistently emphasized that the most important being to communicate with was and is the higher self, or the superconscious. And in her later years, she shifted much of her QHHT focus away from extraordinary phenomena and towards helping clients access their own inner wisdom of healing, guidance, and understanding. So the emphasis is one of the defining features of QHHT today.
Yes, and it's presented and answered really well, and I appreciate that. And you touched on two things that I want to go deeper into that I find really important. You mentioned them, and that is wisdom and discernment, right? And even though we don't normally have access to these states and these beings in this higher level of consciousness or the higher self, which there's been some things pointed out, is if it's any representation or there's any similarity of all, the amount of deception that we deal with on the earth realm, I would say is all over the place. From lying politicians to deceit and everything to just everyday people we meet that are going to just give little white lies because it's just more convenient to do that, and it's more pleasant and easier to just with a little white lie. But when we're looking at, and then the deeper levels of reality, like you say, there's people that talk about simulation theory, but it's just our perception, right? It's very convenient, and we need this to navigate this realm. Is when I look at something behind me, I just say, "Oh, that's a tree." That's a very convenient thing. But so then I think I don't need to look deeper into that. I'm not every time I look at that think, "Oh, I could peel across the bark. I can go into the sapwood and the heartwood. I could mince it down into fine particles. I could extract the sap. I can, put it under chemical analysis and I can extract things like that. And I could find out the years. I could measure the growth. It's on and on. So we go mad if every time I looked at that and then had to go into all the potentiality of a single thing that is just easy to call a tree, right? But the thing is that, I guess our level of consciousness, so by that standard, it would make sense to me that there are beings out there who on what we would say a tree, they would look at it maybe and label it perception, but they're already seeing into that immediately, just as fast as we're saying a tree. However, they're labeling it. I'm just, of course, guessing here, hypothesizing. They're seeing deeper and deeper layers, have more access, but it's almost effortless compared to what we would have to spend the time and energy doing to get on the same level. Now, I don't know if that, you know what I mean? So what I'm saying is that even though we're having access to very potentially vast and profound things, what if they have it a little bit off too, especially in the long term? So this is where we get into things like teachings of the Buddha, where life after life, dukkha and the end of dukkha is what he taught. Because even these high level beings, apparently their lifespan, however vast and long and profound that is, will eventually come to an end, and they're going to have to take another birth. Right. And so that cycle, from what we're told, and of course, like he said, there's no discernible beginning, no discernible end to that. And lifetime, no matter how high and profound, there's still a level of unsatisfactoriness or dukkha that is still latent there, that doesn't completely come to an end until one is fully awakened and enlightened and escape the cycles of birth and death. So I take it to, a more profound level like this and really long term, and to bring it back down to where we're at now comes through discernment, right? And I don't want to undermine the potentiality of this, and the benefits and helpfulness. So I just wanted to focus a little bit before I ask, keep with that in mind. And we're all doing the best we can. We're figuring it out as we go along. We're sharpening our wisdom and discern, or we're on a path to wisdom, and we're sharpening our discernment skills. And why are we doing that? For our well-being and for that of all around us and in the long term. Okay, so it's not to say I'm right, they're wrong, right? It's not to say I told you so or something like this. The discernment is to arrive at higher and higher levels of truth and eventually the ultimate, right? But why? It is for our long-term well-being and happiness and those around us. That's why, it's not so I can gain more power and be, wield power over someone, or, survive at all cost, or I'll help these people so I'll get something, or, ultimately. So I've rambled long enough. I guess the question here is, do you teach discernment skills so that what's being presented here sometimes may not have our best interests at mind, but I'm talking maybe long term, because, like with all the deception, how do we wield this sort of discernment and decisiveness around this? Are there any tools to know what we're being presented with is I guess has our best long-term interest at mind, and that we are not being deceived? But then again, there's another problem where I can only kind of deal with where I'm at now. You know what I mean? We meet people where they are because there's certain things I'm just not capable of yet, right? Do you understand what I mean? Like, it's like trying to tell a third grader they should know calculus. Well, it's just not going to it's not really possible because my level of development isn't there yet. But in the meantime, what do I do for discernment in my best interest and everyone around me, again, long term?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and I feel like it's more important today than ever before, this question about discernment and finding out what is truth versus deception. And you're absolutely right that there is a lot of deception out there. But oftentimes the answers are very simple. And I would say to this that the truth is within us. And this is something that I used to hear from my teachers years ago, and I wouldn't understand it. And I would feel like it's something that didn't really make sense. But for those of us who meditate, and I take it you are on the path, given your podcast and everything that you do, that you know that you have an inner guidance system that can discern truth versus falsehood. And that is what we are being called to come back to ourselves, to our inner wisdom. And although QHHT is a vehicle to access that, meditation is a vehicle to access that, but there'll come a time very soon where we'll be able to access it more and more clearly. This inner wisdom, this higher self or superconscious, whatever you want to call it, it is available to each and every one of us. And as far as deception is concerned, all the deception comes when we open our eyes and we look into this world, because even what we see is not actually what is, right? We know even from a scientific perspective that, for example, this phone may seem solid, but it's not. Everything is vibrating. When you look at it from a very powerful microscope, you see that there's vibrating particles that are continuously in motion. And so we cannot rely on our senses to determine what is true necessarily. We need to look deeper than that. And the good news is that it's all within our grasp because it's within us. If I was to quote a great master, Jesus has said that the kingdom of God is within you, right? Be still and know, be still and know God. This is from the Bible. Knock and you shall receive. Ask and it shall be given. I was not raised Christian and I'm not preaching any religion per se, but there are different wisdom traditions that all point to the same thing, that we all have inner guidance, inner wisdom, right? And I would say Buddha was one of the, Gautama Buddha was one of the greater teachers that's remembered for this, where, these practices of vipassana and meditation and dhamma all bring us to what? Bring us to our own inner wisdom, in our own guidance that's always there to discern what is truth and what is falsehood. And so the deception is part of this matrix, if you will. It's part of this world that at some level we've created so that we can realize and remember that we are the light, that we are the truth, that we are oneness, and that the separation is the illusion, and that what we are perceiving with these senses is perhaps not exactly as we perceive it. And science is now backing that up.
It's a really important point you're getting to here. And I think there's a sutta, is it the Takunda, where there's this level of safeguarding truth, which I don't know about that, because to me, maybe it's about truth can protect itself because truth can't really be destroyed in a way. But then it's awakening to the truth and then the final attainment of truth. And then we have kind of conventional reality and ultimate reality. So we have a conventional truth we're operating in, and then eventually in ultimate truth. So where this is really important, and just kind of our language and our mindset in certain religions have kind of conditioned it to be within a me, right? You talk about we and us, and I would say it's yes, our defilements. I feel that's why that plays a part in our delusion too, not seeing clearly due
absolutely.
to delusion or moha, this ignorance that we have. And then of course, when that's there, then we can fall into ill will and greed. And so these defilements kind of block us a lot from the deeper and deeper things. So I want to get into, this, especially in this work, this notion of a self, which is a huge spiritual question. And of course, there's helpful versions of the self, but they're a construct. We pick them up when they're useful. But then if we go deeper and deeper into investigating, what is a self, you gotta be careful because it can be really destabilizing. So I don't want to push that too far. If we really go into start dissecting what we find as a self, there's really, it's kind of a phantom construct, more ultimate. So I just wanted to also mention where I'm coming from, and thank you for pointing this out, that this is a tool in the toolkit, just like certain meditations can be. And so right now I'm working on a samatha object, Earth Casino. That's my practice now, to go to develop eventually jhana, with the intent of going then into vipassana. So where at least to the stage of ultimate discerning, ultimate mentality and ultimate materiality. So everything we've talked about so far is conceptual, but these are practices that yogis do that they, with the light of wisdom, they can discern the materiality. At least we're just talking about this realm. So where it cannot be subdivided any further. So that's the ultimate as the materiality can go. And then there's ultimate mentality, which, involves the ultimate levels of Vedana, feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, volitional formations, consciousness, and what am I missing here? Perception, of course, the big one that we talked about, right? That you mentioned with the phone illustration. So, but the ultimate levels of those, which can be so where they cannot be broken up anymore. And of course, the senses, which include the mind as a sixth sense, which encompasses pretty much everything else, I guess. But anyway, again, that's I'm not there yet to speak from experience. But so that's kind of where I'm. The discernment in this technique, though, is in some of these is to actually, and I think this is supposed to be a safeguard against imaginings and delusions and or other deception, either technology or misperceptions, or just say, I don't know, getting things just off that could potentially be there or not. And this isn't considered a psychic power as far as I know, but tracing this lifetime back to the womb and then hitting the rebirth linking consciousness, then the death moment of the previous life, and then the near death moment of the previous life, then going back, tracing it, backwards moment, tracing it back until that life comes to the same process, and then going back up to 5 previous lives for certain discernment purposes of reality. So I guess the understanding of that process is there won't be as many gaps or any gaps at all in one's mental continuum of remembrance from direct remembering and knowledge and experience. So that, I guess, is supposed to safeguard a lot of these, all the things that could potentially go wrong, as if I just jump, not willy-nilly, but you know what I mean, into a memory where, we don't know how we got there. It's just kind of emerging. So, and we don't know how. So that's just understanding. So now that's not to say some yogis and sages with psychic powers, I don't know how that works. So they may be able to do all kinds of things that don't need to follow the normal processes and, kind of unexplainable, but that's kind of off the table, I think, for now. I mean, we can go into that. Okay, with that said, the self. Let's if you're willing to dive into that a little bit. I don't know where it would be helpful to know this or how to approach this. I think I have to approach it from suffering and the end of suffering, from well-being for ourselves and others in the long term. So I'll just, instead of me talking about how I view the self or not self, I'll just throw it back to you to see how you approach this notion of self, for well-being.
Mm-hmm. Well, when it comes to self, I would say that there's many versions of the self that we can talk about. But the self that interests me in the work that I do is the true self, or also known as the Atman, right? It's identical with Brahman, the pure, unchanging consciousness. And Dolores often referred to the higher self or the subconscious as timeless, wise, connected to all knowledge, existing beyond one lifetime. So this resembles an enduring spiritual identity. Although it is not identical to the Advaita, I can pronounce it, Advaita, concept of Atman. But the point being that there's something that links all of us and all beings everywhere. And it's not something necessarily that we can see with our eyes or sense with most of our senses. But, I'm sure if you've been meditating for some time, you know that there's experiences where you have outer body experiences, or you feel, people have had explained, they get a sense of oneness with all that is, and they feel connected to beyond their body, right? Or even people who have had near-death experiences, they'll tell you that, this body is a very heavy bag of bones, if you will. And when you leave it, it just feels incredible. And for myself, I've had 3 near-death experiences. And if that has taught me anything in my years of meditation, is that there's more going on than we realize. And as far as the self is concerned, yeah, we can explore it. We can explore it conceptually, through books and ideas and titles and, what has been taught in different wisdom traditions. Nothing wrong with that. But then we can also experience it. And that's where I'm interested in, is experiencing, much like the Buddha did, where, he didn't go out and start teaching right away. He wanted to know, where does the suffering come from? Why do people suffer? Even though he's in a kingdom, he just had a child, he decided to leave all that to figure out why people suffer. And after spending considerable time by himself and meditating, he was able to reach a level where he was able to get this download, if you will, and people will describe it in different ways, but he was able to get an experience that till this date, people are interpreting in different ways. So I would say, it reminds me of what, if we look at the patterns that most of these wise beings that have walked the earth and continue to walk the earth have told us, is that we have access to the truth ourselves, each one of us, each individual, those listening to this podcast, to be able to access that true self within us. And yes, maybe at first it may not be clear what the truth is. And that will require discernment, that will require practice, that will require questioning. But ultimately, I don't feel like this universe or whoever created it, call it God, call it whatever, life, universe, source, whatever you want to call it, that it intended to trick us or make it difficult for us. In fact, if you look at even most of the Buddhist teachings, they're quite simple and they're experiential, calling us back into, looking to find and observe our bodies, observe our breath, observe our reality for what it is, rather than take other people's interpretations of it. And that's actually what I love about quantum hypnosis, is that I'm not the one telling the client anything. I'm not the one professing to have all the answers. I'm not a psychic here to tell you your future or what's going on. The wisdom is within you. I'm just here to help you unlock that so that it comes through your own mouth. And that's the beauty of it, is that not only does it come through the client's mouth, the wisdom, but it's something that directly impacts what they need to hear in that moment. So whether it's ultimate truth, or it's even worst case scenario, it's deception or just imaginary, it almost doesn't matter, because if you look at the results, they end up having a more fulfilled life, better relationships. And if the relationship's not good, many times after the session, they look to end a relationship that otherwise they would have stuck with for the rest of their lives. And so, there's so many stories that I have of my own from my clients and even with myself, because I've been hypnotized under this 4 times, and each time has been profound. I've had epiphanies, I've had realizations and visions that were shown to me that I really needed to see. And, the proof of this is that many times clients will cry, and they'll, it's a visceral impact on them. They are feeling and seeing things that matter to them. And so at the end of the day, whether it's imaginary deception or, just a psychological result of guidance in a hypnotic state, it almost doesn't matter. What matters is that they're getting the results that they came for. They're getting their questions answered. They're getting the healing they're looking for, and they're getting the results in their life that lead them to living a more fulfilled life with less suffering.
And I would even say on deeper levels, whatever their experience is, then they'll have that experience to then investigate further and go deeper, like you said, and the Buddha said, and the wise say, to be realized for each wise one for themselves. No one else can realize it for us. We can get teachings, but nobody can do kind of the work and gather and bestow wisdom directly on us, right? We have to see and know this for ourselves. And so this will be an experience that then we'll have to go with our own wisdom, now or later, and go deeper into the discernment levels of that anyway. So no matter what happens, in some sense, that will still apply. And like you said, the track record's already there of all the benefit. People can just look this up. I didn't want to spend so much time because to me, it's just obvious how this, I mean, the testimony, not everybody can be faking this. It just doesn't seem possible to me, So all that's there and video testimony. So you mentioned something here that I found helpful too, is that, nothing happens in a vacuum. The language I like to use is we're all interconnected and interdependent, if we want to look at it on that. Nothing exists from its own side by itself, right? We don't live in a vacuum. So all this, to me, instead of an ultimate self, it's all due to causes and conditions, right? There's so many different causes and conditions. Like a seed doesn't say, well, I mean, that's it. But a seed has to have the right conditions in place. Otherwise it won't take root. But there's, so in us, what we it's a convenience and a helpful one and a really skillful one. It sometimes should just simplify and say I, right? If we look into that a little bit deeper, what am I? Am I the body? Do I own this body? Am I inside this body? Or is the body in me? And so some people over-identify with the body, and then we can take that with feelings. Some people are really identified with how they feel. But am I feelings? Do I own these feelings? Am I inside the feelings? Are the feelings inside me? So, and then we can look at that on deeper levels with perception, and then our mental formations or volition, and then consciousness itself. And we see that, there's not these beings, they see this and experience this different ways. And we might see and experience this different ways throughout our lifetime. Like, where is the little 3-year-old boy that I have pictures of, but is that me? Is that not me? When this body is completely deteriorated and turned back to the earth and the elements, where's the Josh then, So this, it's just what we normally just as a convenience think, oh, there's something, or there's a little Josh inside here somewhere that never changes. But like, if we look a little bit deeper into that, well, what is that? We just kind of have, the image that's given is like a flower. Okay, well, where does the scent come from, this eye? Does it come from the petals, the stamen, the other little things? No, it's just kind of the whole thing all together, but it's kind of vague. You can't really capture it in essence and preserve it and, duplicate or something like that. No, it's all due to causes and conditions, And yes, I'm sorry, I don't have the deep realization from direct experience. Yes, this is just something you have to hear about and you have to put it into practice for yourself, because even from me, the words that I say like that, they don't carry so much weight because I haven't, fully realized what I'm talking about. I've just scratched the surface of these things. You know what I mean? So again, like you're saying, it has to be seen and known for ourselves. That's kind of the paradox, right? That's the convention that we live in, and then it invites investigation, right? We have to investigate these things for ourselves. We can't just take it from someone else. That's how it is. So we gather the knowledge, we find what's helpful, and then we look into it for ourselves. And we have teachers, and we have experiences too. So that's where I wanted to go with this. Okay, so let's talk about hypnosis, if you don't mind, and how standard hypnosis may be similar and different to the type of hypnosis that is involved in this technique, and what people should know about that and find helpful about this. From the client side and from the practitioner side, I find too, what's helpful to mention about this.
Well, I would mention a couple of things. First and foremost, when people think of hypnosis, sometimes they think of someone waving, a pendulum in front of them, and then they lose control. Next thing you know, you're quacking like a duck, pretending to be a bird, for example. That is stage hypnosis. And what you're referring to is standard hypnosis. Now, standard hypnosis is used for therapeutic purposes, and that's actually how quantum hypnosis started. As I mentioned earlier, that Dolores was doing hypnosis focused on specific issues such as smoking, confidence, phobias, habits, stress, PTSD, etc. The difference being that, one difference is that standard hypnosis is usually just about an hour or two and you're done, but you generally need to come back again and again. Whereas in quantum hypnosis healing technique, it's typically 4 to 7 hours. And it really depends on what the client needs. And we explore the whole person, including life patterns, purpose, and self-understanding. And then standard hypnosis may use suggestion-based techniques. Whereas in QHHT, it's primarily exploratory rather than suggestion-based. And as I mentioned, in standard hypnosis, you may be coming back for several sessions to seek your treatment. Whereas in QHHT, typically it's designed that one comprehensive session is enough. And for whatever reason, if you require more, or if you are curious or you want to delve more into your consciousness, then it's usually not recommended that you repeat it within 3 months or 6 months after your session, because you need time to integrate. And then standard hypnosis, the therapist often guides towards a specific behavioral outcome, whereas in QHHT, us practitioners, we facilitate the client's own exploration and their own insights. And that's a big key difference. And in standard hypnosis, usually they don't include regression, where they take you into the past of this current life or past life, but regression and dialogue with the higher self is something that's very central to QHHT, and you don't usually find it in standard hypnosis. So that's how I would say standard hypnosis and QHHT differ.
Very good. Okay. And so as we start to wind down here, let's get back more into the traditional container of this modality, and just talk about some of the clients. You've mentioned some already, some that come to you, and it doesn't necessarily, you can go beyond that into other practitioners that you've talked to in this, and if it makes sense to bring in some of their experiences and some of the benefits that they've experienced around this. And also, if you want to talk about some of the challenges faced on both the client and the practitioner side, and then how those have been overcome through wisdom or fine tunings, or things that happened out of the blue seemingly, or something like this. Sometimes people find those stories fascinating too.
Well, I would say that each session has many stories within it. Just yesterday, I had a client that is an incredible woman. She's developed her own healing technique and has had many experiences that are extraordinary to most people, including abductions by aliens when she was young. And it's something that even her sister recalls, and it's been published in a couple of books. She had an experience with an ascended master, Jesus in this case, who gave her healing powers. And I was able to do a session for her because if you are in the healing world, you know that even healers sometimes need healers. So I'm very grateful and humbled that a lot of practitioners, they seek me out. And I had one in particular that comes to mind that came here and drove about 4 hours to come see me. And actually her video is on my YouTube. Her name is Vivian. She was looking for certain clarity that in her life and answers to certain questions. And that's usually why people come. They're looking for answers. They want to, as I stated earlier, that sometimes they want to know, they feel stuck maybe in their job or in their personal life or relationship or in life in general. And they just want to know the next steps ahead of them that serve their best and highest good. Sometimes they're also suffering from certain symptoms. And there's many, many cases of people who have come to QHHT and have been healed from all sorts of illnesses. And if we realize and if we understand where these illnesses come from, then it's easier to appreciate and understand that, it's not necessarily something that's miraculous that's going on, but very natural. And you'll appreciate this given your Buddhist teachings and background, that all of these emotions that we feel, when we hold on to certain emotions and certain feelings, especially those that don't serve us, then they end up manifesting as dis-ease in our body, as illness, because we haven't listened to the wisdom that our body has been giving us. And so then by the time they come to us, many times they've already been to doctors and they've been on different medications and treatments from the Western medicine perspective. And so what's really great about QHHT, as I mentioned earlier, is that it looks at the person from a very holistic perspective. And from that, I mean, not just the person that's standing or sitting in front of me, but who they've been in across all lifetimes, and their connection to and their interrelatedness, as you had mentioned earlier, to all that is. And when you look at a person from that perspective, one thing happens is that as a practitioner, we realize that we're connected. It's just another version of me that's sitting there in that chair in front of me, just like you are. And so there's a sacredness that comes with this kind of work. There's a humbleness as well, because as I said, and Dolores has said, that we may not know exactly how it's happening, but we can look at all these patterns across thousands and thousands of clients and see that it works. And we don't necessarily need to know how it works, or, what are the mechanics that are the inner workings of it. And that's part of the blessing of it. It's just like life. We may not see or perceive everything that's actually going on around us. And if we did, we'd probably go crazy. It's like those people that they have their third eye activated, or have a Kundalini awakening. It's oftentimes life becomes much harder. We think that, once you reach enlightenment or you have an awakening, life will be simpler or easier or perfect. And, nothing can be further than the truth. In fact, you start to see things much clearer. And when there is deception, when there is something that's inauthentic, then it will irk you like never before. So I feel like the beauty of this work, and I haven't always been a believer of this. I haven't been a believer of past lives. I haven't been a believer of meditation and the power of altered states of consciousness in a natural way. But life has brought me to this work, and I'm very, very grateful, because it's a very balanced and a safe way to explore consciousness, which is not very different from meditation, because in meditation, you are silencing your mind. You're coming to a state of relaxation where you're able to get certain guidance. And so in QHHT, we bring the client to a theta brainwave state, which is a very natural state. It's a state we're in prior to sleep. So you're deeply relaxed. And in that state, we're able to access a part of your inner wisdom that actually holds the truth, that holds your truth. And, we might think that it would be different for everyone. In a sense, it may be. However, what we found is, and what I find from my practice, is that truth becomes universal at that level. Because, for example, when I said that the body and the emotions, when they're held on to, especially the negative ones, they result in illness and disease, we come to find out that when the person finds the source of it, if I give you an example, you were asking earlier, example would be, I had a client so in QHHT during the hypnosis portion, there's essentially 3 sections. We take them into a past life, or we regress them to a time that's important for them to experience. And then we bring in the superconscious, or the higher self, or what Dolores called the subconscious. And we look to scan the body and see what's going on, if there's any energy blocks. And we look to answer all the questions that the client has come with. So these are the different parts of the hypnosis portion of QHHT. And during one of these particular hypnosis sessions, I had a client who she was overweight, and she's in her 80s, and she started to lie on her side. And this was from the healing part onwards. And for about an hour, she was lying on her side. And at the end of the hypnosis session, she was in tears. And I asked her, I said, what's going on? And she says that I can lie on my side. I said, yeah, what's the big deal? She says, I don't think you understand. I haven't been able to lie on my side in years. I said, wow, in years? She goes, yeah, perhaps more than a decade. And I've been comfortably lying on my side since the healing started. So this is just one example. And what was interesting was the reason why she was having the pain in her shoulder that prevented her from lying on her side was because she hadn't forgiven her mother for allowing her basically she was sexually abused by a stepfather when she was a child. And she felt that her mother should have protected her. And then, so as her mother was aging, she was responsible for her care, but she did it, with a sense of animosity, anger, resentment, and that accumulated in her shoulder. And so when the higher self explained to her the connection of it, and she was able to forgive her mother and also see, that her mother was doing the best she could given what she knew, and that she would not want any harm to come to her daughter. And that this happened, but it happened for some reason that is beyond the human comprehension in this time space reality. And she started to understand the bigger picture of it. Then she was able to heal that on her own. So the wisdom was within her, and the healing also came from within her. And so this is what we've come to realize from QHHT, is that it is within us. And when Buddha went away and went into meditation for all those days, and people meditate and they go inwards, there's a big benefit to that. And one can argue not just to themselves, but to the entire world, to the entire galaxy. And, given my personal experience through meditation and through this work, I can see a lot of parallels. And I feel really blessed that I get to do this work, because I take people that would otherwise probably never meditate into a meditative state and be able to get their questions answered and hopefully get them the healing that they're looking for.
Here I said I wasn't going to spend too much time getting personal testimonies, but then I realized, this is how to link up the immediate real lived experience with the vast and profound, and so many things, don't really make sense until we have this larger container of the causes and conditions that led up to where we're at now, right? So if there's not this hard, fast Western limit of just one lifetime, right, then things start to make sense. Like you're saying that, yes, there's causes and many causes leading to many effects, and the conditionality has to be there in place for these things to ripen and take fruit. Then okay, oh yeah, this could make a lot more sense now. And it's not just a imaginary leap as a convenience to have it. I mean, as you said that, I was feeling, the amount of the feelings and experience that were coming up to empathizing with what you related there. These are, again, this is something that has to be seen and known for oneself, and until one actually has the experience, it is just more theoretical, right? So it can go deeper, deeper and deeper in that. And so other two things came up more on maybe on the practitioner side. I'm thinking, Dolores was in the position to gather so many different case testimonies and things, and then start piecing together, connecting the dots, and then she could have access to that to help make sense on a bigger picture of what was going on. And I'm just wondering now if it's okay for you to say or not, that once you become a licensed practitioner, are you kind of required to report? How's the confidentiality? Because I can see on one hand, this is highly personal things, and that you need to get explicit permission from the clientele. But I can also see, like in other practices, where you just keep it more anonymous, and then the anonymous part of the data can be collated and then could be of benefit for other people. But then I'm thinking, well, it all depends on who has access to that and how it's interpreted. So I'm just wondering what the protocol is for this, if there is more of a central data collection, and how that's being used or not, since Dolores has passed. And yeah, let's just start there. I think, and then there was something else too, but that's enough for now.
Well, I can't comment on behalf of QHHT headquarters. What they do and with the information, or what information they have, is up to them. But as a practitioner of quantum hypnosis, and I say that because I don't just practice QHHT, I also practice BQH, which is beyond quantum healing. And I also bring in my own flavor based on my learnings from other spiritual teachers. So for myself, what I do is everything by default is private. By default, it's private. However, if the client chooses, for the benefit of humanity, and also it benefits more people to learn from this, they can give me permission to put their session out on YouTube or on Instagram, on social media. And so I do that with their consent. And so you'll find many, many videos that I have on my YouTube channel that show the hypnosis portion of the session. And I may have mentioned earlier that there's there's the hypnosis portion, but that comes only after the pre-hypnosis, which is usually a sit-down conversation with a client. It can be anywhere from, in QHHT, they say minimum 2 hours. But sometimes people can do it quicker if they're returning clients, or, if they just want to get to the hypnosis portion, but usually 2 hours, sometimes longer. And in that time, we sit down and we get to know the client intimately. And many times they share things that they wouldn't even with their closest loved ones. So yes, privacy is very, very important. And that information is not shared with anybody, of course, unless the client wants it to be shared. So yes, privacy is a big deal. And in fact, if I could say something on behalf of QHHT, I would say that I don't think that it serves them to let that information just be out there irresponsibly, because it is sacred. It's sacred in the sense that it can impact people's lives negatively if it's used in the wrong way. And so, obviously Dolores kept a log of her clients and their sessions and what the outcome was. And I do the same for my clients. And when she did publish her books, if she had permission, she mentioned names. Otherwise, she didn't need to mention names. But the connection and what she found, this is very interesting, because unless you've experienced quantum hypnosis yourself, it's hard to relate. But what I can tell you is that what Dolores and us practitioners often find as well is that when we go from client to client, a lot of times the messages that come from the subconscious or the superconscious, the higher self, is consistent across the board. Doesn't matter who it's coming through. And so usually, like I said, it's very wise, it's very clear, it's very direct, and it has a specific way of speaking, which is very different from when the client is in a past life experience, where often when they're in a deep state of hypnosis, they'll take on that character. And the deeper they are, sometimes they'll take it on fully. They'll even put on an accent that they didn't know they had. They'll speak in that way that they would if they were back in that time. So it's very, very fascinating. And so to, again, come full circle in terms of privacy, yes, as practitioners, the default is that everything is private, although many clients do choose for the benefit of humanity to allow certain portions to be public.
So there's no requirement from headquarters to do just a report to them, a basic log anonymously or anything like that, or no reporting requirements to them. Although I can assume if there's red flags, maybe. But then, of course, we have to follow laws, of course, from authorities. So if somebody gets, from the government or whatever with subpoena somebody that's in trouble, then of course we have to follow through with that. Unless I'm imagining, I don't know how the law works in Canada or even in the States around this, unless someone wanted to go to jail to protect someone's privacy. But I'd imagine that nothing like that's ever happened. And it's totally okay not to comment on that too. With the internet these days, I just assume that if anything touches a computer that has access to the internet, the more time we go forward in the future, the more the probability increases for someone to have access to that. So I know old school therapists in the UK who write it down,
yes,
and then put it in the safe. But So yeah.
Let me put it this
follow
way.
up on that before I go into Michael Newton stuff.
Yeah. So let me put your heart at peace. The beauty of this work is that at the end of the day, it reminds us of our interconnectedness. It reminds us that we have more in common than we have differences, and it breaks down the divisions. So even if it does become public and the world comes to know every little detail of every little session, I don't think that that's the worst thing that can happen for humanity. In fact, I think something beautiful would come out of it, because people would realize that they're not alone when they feel like they are in a relationship that they cannot leave, that they're not alone when they have all these symptoms. They may look perfect on the outside. I had a girl here the other day. She's like a supermodel, but she has all these problems that people would not ever know about otherwise. But the point being that people are more normal than you may realize. We're more connected than you may realize. There's more that we hold in common than we do differences. So I don't necessarily think it would be a bad thing. I can't comment on the legality of it so far as what I do personally. But further than that, I think it really depends on the organization and the practitioners and what they choose to do. But when you come to the work of healing, then you have a duty to look out for the highest and best interest of the client, whether you're a channel, whether you're an acupuncturist, whether you're a Reiki master, whatever you do, you are there to look out for the highest and best interest of the client. And so I feel like as long as that intent is at heart, what happens beyond that, yes, there's going to be people, there's going to be things that will look to exploit information, use it for and twist it and turn it against humanity. But I feel like we are living in a time of awakening where people are starting to realize truths that have otherwise been hidden, and many of which have been malicious, many of which have been deceptive. You know, you look at Epstein, for example, and the Epstein files, for example, you know, and people eating children and drinking children's blood. And you know, this is something that would have been science fiction just years ago, or a conspiracy theory at best. And now it's out there in the open. So now humanity is faced with a mirror. You know, we're looking at ourselves and deciding what do we do with this? Where do we go with this? Is this who we are? Is this what's going to define us going forward? And so we're at a precipice that's very, very important for humanity, a time of reckoning, a time of awakening, a time of seeing thyself in a way that, you know, may be very, very uncomfortable. And I feel, and my teacher Dolores has stated this, that those of us that are alive in this time-space reality on Earth today are very fortunate. In fact, she says that we have the golden ticket. And when asked about that, she said that the higher self revealed to her that those of us that are alive, we not only we chose to be alive at this time, but it's almost like we won that lottery of being on Earth at this time, a time of awakening, a time of reckoning, a time of great change. And the change is ultimately for the betterment, you know, and the key here is to stay in love, stay in joy, stay in peace, stay in oneness. And as long as we're in that connectedness, then it doesn't matter how, you know, people or things or schemes may be out there to deceive us. We will come back to love. We'll come back to joy. We'll come back to balance. That is our inherent identity.
Well, I will say that it should go without saying that I don't need to do the disclaimer, but I guess I do now, that, you know, this is only intended for those for benevolent use. You know, it's not an allowance for the dark masters and the dark ones to say, see, we're just doing what we're doing. We're paying a role. So get you out of your sleep and slumber and advance you, because if we don't do it, you're going to be stagnant. No, I don't consent to that. You know, that's not an excuse for malevolent, malicious behavior. So I just throw that in there too. That's a kind of a nice retroactive get out of jail free card kind of thing. So yeah, I don't consent to that. But I definitely will agree that this precious human life is very fortunate, and we blow it off all too soon, because in other realms there's so much more suffering where there's just no reprieve for any kind of advance. We just kind of have to waiting it out, you know. And then from what I've been told, of course, and then in higher realms, the pleasure is just so great that there's little incentive for advancement. So yeah, this very precious human life now, you know, how well are we spending our time? This is a great opportunity. No matter what's on our plate, we can now choose to see something in a different way, in a more skillful way, a more wholesome way, and then respond, you know, no matter what happens. And then also what we pay attention to and how we pay attention to it. These seem to be at least partially under some kind of, you know, not agency so much, but as choice. You know, there seems to be some kind of volition involved in this. So yeah, so that, and I will say too, that no matter the privacy, there's probably more advanced beings, even if they just have access to better technology, that all the stuff we're talking about privacy is completely irrelevant, because they have it all anyway immediately, right? So Correct. We're just talking about the lower level type thing here, and where consent and consent is a big deal. You know, people write it off and people assume tacit consent. So it's really important, you know, to realize what others are assuming as tacit consent and what we're not, and what we're actually consenting to. And of course, our intentionality behind everything will drive the outcome, right? If we think, speak, and act intentionally, that's going to have then the consequences will be likewise, or tend to be more likewise. So that's what's really important, our intentionality that drives these things, and that we're 100% responsible for our intentions, no one else, you know. Okay, now the outcome, we have to take some responsibility, but it would be just great if everybody took everything I said exactly the way I wanted to say it, right? But that would be lovely, I guess. But that's not the case. But I have to be responsible for some of that. right? And feed that back into my own intentionality. But okay, so that aside, sorry, this is a little long-winded, unless you wanted to pick up on anything there.
Yeah, if I may,
Sure,
just
please.
quickly.
Sure.
So Dolores said it, and she's not the only one to say it. Many have said it before her and will continue to say it after her, that we are it's as if we're actors in this lifetime. We're wearing these bag of bones that I call Ali, and you have your name, etc. So these are identities that we built up for our lives, and we identify with it as if it's me, it's I. And yet Dolores has said that we are the actors, playwriters, producers of our own play. And any time we're not happy with it, we can rewrite the script. Meaning what? Meaning that we are the creators of our reality. And even when, if we look into the Buddhist traditions and when we meditate and we observe our reality, our inner reality, our breath, our body, the sensations in our body, we look at Vipassana, talks a lot about sankharas and looking at your reality for what it is, regardless of dogma, like putting that aside, putting religion aside, looking at your reality for what it is, we start to realize that we have control over certain things, and those things can change everything, and if we look at the tools that we've been given of thoughts, words, and actions, and we look as those as tools of creation, then we can start to observe our thoughts. And meditation is one of those ways to get to understand that you could be an observer. You don't have to identify, as you had mentioned earlier in this podcast, that you don't have to identify with the emotions as being I, or the feelings, or the thoughts. So you start to observe the thoughts, and you start to find that your thoughts start to become purified as you're dealing with the sankharas, as you're dealing with, these things that come up when you meditate or when you do the inner work. And then it starts to impact your words. And we've heard it perhaps before that words create worlds. So with our words, we're creating as well. And then with our actions. So through thoughts, words, and actions, we're creating our reality. And if we don't like what we see, we can just change that, rescript it, start changing the way that you think, start changing your perspective on things, the words that you use, and the actions that you're taking in your reality will start to change as well.
Including, like you said, not taking ownership of something on the outside, but taking ownership and responsibility for that intentionality of our speech and actions, right? And that, the less kind of possessions and things I'm chasing, the less problems I'm going to have eventually. It's nothing wrong to have, of course we have to take care of our basic needs, but there's no requirement for me to take ultimate ownership of anything, right? In fact, then there's that clinging, that tightness of it. But like you're saying, when we think, speak, or act with intentionality, it has consequences, good, bad, otherwise. That's right. And don't think that it's not going to make a difference, because even the little bit can add up, on both sides. So it does matter, not to get overwhelmed and like have to, constantly contemplate for 5 years on one little action or something like that. We're doing the best we can. We're developing skills as we go. So yeah. It's a good point. So the other thing it fascinates me around this work, I only read one of Michael Newton's book, and Journey of Souls, the first one, I think. And I don't know if you're familiar with his work or not. I want to find out where there's commonalities and where there's differences among like cosmological systems too. And then also patterns in your own practice compared to, that's the other thing. Dolores, is there anything you can kind of give us updates on, if you talk with other practitioners, where things might have changed the same with Dolores's, what she found, and where things are changing and maybe no longer apply just due to, nothing's changed the same. We're not still living in the 60s. So there's some things that we can relate to from, let's just randomly say the 60s, and some things we can't because things change whether we want them to or not. So yeah, bring us for an update on Dolores's, and then whatever you feel is worthwhile saying about kind of the crossover between other people doing similar type works and where they might diverge.
Before Dolores passed on, she forbade us from doing this type of work online, for example. But then COVID hit and we were in lockdown, as most of us remember. And yet there were clients that were still seeking out therapy and they wanted healing. So many of us did go online, contrary to what Dolores had said. But then we've come to find in our dreams, in our sessions, that when Dolores has come up, she's embracing it now, because at that time, the internet was perhaps not as reliable. And the fear was that if the person is in a state of hypnosis and for whatever reason, if they're going through, let's say, a traumatic experience and the session cuts off because of technology, then what? And thankfully, we have safeguards around that now. Although QHHT does not allow, and we do not call it QHHT when we do it online. One of her students that was a moderator for their internal forum by the name of Candice, went on to create something called BQH, which stands for Beyond Quantum Healing. And that is a little bit more open-ended in the sense that it allows other types of modalities for you to mix them in, if you will, if it makes sense for the benefit of the client. Some people bring in Reiki, some people bring in channeling, different people bring in different things. But the point being that it allows for you to do quantum hypnosis remotely. And that has just opened up a whole new world for myself, for my clients, and so many people around the world, because there are people that live perhaps in an isolated place or a place where there's no practitioner that's, they've deemed qualified enough to help them. Or they may have a phobia. Someone might be living down the street, but they have a phobia of getting in a car or something, or walking over for whatever reason, or unable to, or they're locked into a bed at a hospital and they need this type of therapy. Or, so BQH allows for that. And so there are others that are popping up, and I think they will continue to, just like things evolve and, technologies evolve. I wouldn't be surprised if more come up in the future. So I hope that answers your question in that realm.
Well, one caveat, sorry to interject here. Are you allowed to say the backup? Is it just like, okay, if the connection drops, you just have another connection, maybe a telephone nearby? Or how do you,
Mm-hmm.
you said there's a safeguard. Are you allowed to say anything about that? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. There are many safeguards. The most important safeguard that we set up, we do have certain things that we set up individually as practitioners to ensure that the session goes well. One of those things you've touched on earlier is the intention. And as subtle as it may seem, it's super important. Because if the intention is just to make a quick buck and get a client in and out of the space, then that type of practice probably won't last long. So intention is one of them. The other is we have safeguards, as in you can call them prayers, you can call them invocations, you can call them spiritual guards that we set up so that the client, goes into these journeying experiences in a safe way and comes out safely without any attachments, if you will. So this is more on the metaphysical, non-physical perspective of it. But then when it comes to technology, for example, you let the person know, in hypnosis, we do something called an induction. I don't know if you heard of that, but it's essentially a way of getting a client into a hypnotic state. And so, for example, one of the things that may break up a hypnosis session may be that they need to get up and go to the restroom. Well, guess what? It's completely okay and it's normal. And sometimes it happens. I've had a client that had a bladder issue and she had to go to the restroom several times. So we may introduce a suggestion in the hypnotic state that when you get up and go to the restroom, you will go perfectly safely. And when you return, you'll be even deeper still in the state that you were in. And so these kind of suggestions empower the person so that if for whatever reason, God forbid, the connection was to break, that they would be able to reach out to us. So for example, what I do personally is I give them my cell phone number. So during the session, it's on airplane mode. But if for whatever reason we get cut off, which has never happened yet, thank goodness. But if it ever happens in the unforeseen reason, we will try to log back in with no issues. If they cannot log back in, then I will take my phone off airplane mode. They will call me and we will finish the session over the phone. So it's not a big deal is what I'm trying to say, as we may have thought before. And I've never had an issue, and all of the practitioners that I know, so many of them, have never had an issue that has been dire or problematic.
Yeah. Very good. The only thing I can think of is, and I don't know enough about hypnosis, but I wonder if there's like a threshold state during induction where either, I don't know if it's a black and white thing or there's a gray area where right on the threshold of hypnosis, there's some kind of disconnection. The likelihood of that happening, who knows? But, so I'm just thinking it would either just have to start over, or I don't know if there's some kind of intermediate state that's really sensitive, but the likelihood of something happening during some kind of threshold during induction is probably, very low. And I don't know how fast that process is or how steady.
To lay your mind at rest, think of it when you're sleeping and you have a dream, right? Sometimes you have a very vivid nightmare or a dream and you wake up just all of a sudden and it's like there's no clear ending to it necessarily, but you just wake up and you feel jolted. So that worst case scenario, that kind of experience can happen. But again, we set up safeguards before, during, and after. And also, to answer your question, we have deepeners, we call them deepeners, where we are able to take the person into a deeper state once they come back so that we can reconvene with the session.
Yeah, very good. All right. Yeah, there's so many more areas we can go into, but I already asked about the crossover, the similarities and differences between other people in this field, and then Dolores's what's
I didn't
changed.
get to answer that, but if you'd like, I can answer that.
Okay, yes, great. Please. Let's say if you have time, we might as well, because I find this fascinating. I would really like to explore this if you'd like to.
Yeah, sure. I have a few minutes, so we might as well go into it. So when it came to, you mentioned Journey of the Souls, right? So in Journey of the Souls and in some of the other spiritual traditions, there are several reoccurring ideas. And some of those ideas may be around, for example, the soul continuing beyond death. So Newton's clients frequently described consciousness continuing after death. So it's very similar to our experiences with QHHT clients. Many times they report experiences between lives, many near-death experiences describing ongoing awareness, or many spiritual traditions also teach some form of continuing of consciousness. So that is a commonality. Another would be life reviews, right? One of Newton's strongest recurring themes in his book is about life review. So clients often describing reliving important events, experiencing situations from another person's perspective, learning from their choices rather than being judged. So Dolores Cannon also reported similar accounts from her clients. And I've had that in my own sessions. So that would be a second one. And then a third one would be soul groups. Newton wrote extensively about soul groups. And these are described as souls who repeatedly incarnate together in different roles. It could be a parent, child, spouse, friend, teacher, or even an adversary. And many QHHT clients report similar themes. So that's another commonality. And then if I was to give a fourth one, I would say life planning before birth. So perhaps this is like Newton's most famous concept, because clients, even in QHHT, frequently describe planning major life lessons, choosing their families, selecting their challenges, having what some know as soul contracts, even preparing alongside guides, spiritual guides. So Dolores Cannon's work also contains many accounts of pre-birth planning, and I've experienced it with some of my clients as well. And then if I was to give a fifth one, fifth commonality would be spirit guides or teachers. So Newton's work often described guides, teachers, elders, councils, I think that's how he called it. So their role wasn't to control people, but to educate and assist. So similar reports appear in many QHHT sessions as well. So these are the commonalities that I could think of at the moment.
Very good. Yeah, I'm just fascinated because, like this, like say Missouri in the States, the people in charge and power that are on higher levels. Sorry, there's flies here. It's quite a different flavor and agendas compared to when I go to Denmark, right, and live on this little island of the Maine coast. So it fascinates to me if that scales up to beyond the human world and these higher level beings. Of course, my guess is they also have agendas. And with varying degrees, it's not as simple as all black and white, good and light, but within each group, there's different agendas and alliances and things like that. So I wonder if there's anything to report on that.
I'm going to give you an answer that will wrap it all up. The answer is probably something similar that Buddha and the great teachers have always told us, is that, don't believe what I'm saying, experience it for yourself. And so I invite you and all the listeners here that if you haven't experienced quantum hypnosis, whether you do it through me or anyone else, experience it for yourself, and we'll have a whole different conversation. because it's like someone describing, vanilla ice cream to someone who's just been having chocolate ice cream their whole life. It's better that you experience it and then we can talk about it. So my invitation to you and the listeners is that if you're interested in this, there's practitioners all over the world for both QHHT and if you're interested in getting in touch with me, you can get in touch with me through QHHT with Ali.com. And I offer both remote sessions through or in person here in Toronto or Vancouver, Canada through QHHT. And I encourage you to explore. You owe it to yourself. If you're curious about this or curious about consciousness or getting answers to your questions that, you may feel like everywhere else may be deception, but guess what? Your inner wisdom is not there to deceive you. It's not there to be a big question mark for the rest of your life. It's speaking to you every moment of the day. The question is, are you listening? And do you have the tools to access that? And QHHT is one of those ways to access it.
Lovely. Yes. Onward and inward. That's right. And so, Ali, thanks so much for taking the time and putting up with my kind of interesting questions when they're on the good, when they were on the good side there. But I really do appreciate what you're doing. And this is something definitely to explore further and deeper. So with that, may all beings everywhere realize awakening and be free. Bye now.
Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Namaste.
Sadhu.